welcome. My name is Ryan. I'm also known as RM2K Dev. I have 3 things to tell you guys before we get started on this video. Number 1, please leave a comment in the section below and let me know what you'd like to see in the next video. Number 2, if you like this video, please click the like button. It will help the channel grow and then we can do more of this. And number 3, if you'd like to help support the creation of more videos like this, head on over to patreon.com/rm2kdev, where you can drop $1 in the hat and get some really cool rewards. With that said, let's get started. Today's video is about dialogue systems. This was a request in the last Game Maker tutorial that I made, where I asked you guys to leave a comment in the section below the video requesting what you'd like to see. I then took all of those comments, threw them up onto Patreon, and this was the winner. Here we are. So let's get started. A simple dialogue system in Game Maker Studio 2. I have a base project up and running. It's really nothing special. It's just a room, a sprite, and an object. And if you place multiple objects on the room, it will automatically select a different face. I have made the project files for this video available. It is available to Patreons of the channel over on patreon.com/rm2kdev, where you can download the file. Also, it will come with a asset pack. The assets came from Open Game Art, so that's available to anyone. But I have created a text file which contains all of the links to the places you can get the assets from, as well as the project file for you guys to take and use as you experiment with this set of code. So, getting started, the first thing that we are going to do is create a couple of scripts. And I'll get into what each of these does. We'll go to scripts, we'll add a group. I'm going to call this dialogue. Oh, I spelt that incorrectly. There we go. Then we're going to go ahead and add 3 scripts to that. These are going to be called add dialogue. Then the next script is going to be called play dialogue. And the final script is going to be called create dialogue. I hope I'm spelling dialogue right. Now, these 3 scripts, obviously, they are going to create a dialogue system. They are going to add messages into the dialogue system that was created, and then they're going to instantiate an object to deal with the playback of dialogue. The next thing we're going to do before we start writing any code is head over to the objects. I'm going to add a new object, and I'm going to call this object obj_dialogue_system. This object is going to be responsible for displaying messages on the screen. It's going to be responsible for passing the dialogue and animating a window that opens up, if you want to do it that way, or popping the dialogue up above a character's head. Again, we're not going to put any code into this object just yet. It's just here to serve as a reference for the moment. Heading back to our scripts, let's go to create dialogue. We are going to return a DSQ. I'm going to use the function DSQ create. Now, it might seem weird to abstract the function DSQ create. The reason that we're doing this is so that we have a simple function that has been abstracted under the name dialogue that always returns a queue. This will avoid us creating bugs in the future. If it's left to the programmer to decide what type of memory or map we're going to use to store information in, you might come across a scenario where you accidentally create a stack, or you create a list, or you create a queue, or you create a map instead of creating a queue, which is what we need for the dialogue system. So by abstracting that simple function away into our own script called create dialogue, we can ensure that as we program our game, as we call the function create dialogue, it will always return us the object that we actually need to use to create dialogues. And that way we don't have any bugs where we've accidentally created a list instead of a queue, or a stack instead of a queue. Next thing we'll do is we'll head over to add message. And I am going to add a simple line of code here that just says DSQ. The function I believe is called enqueue. The ID of the queue that we're going to use is going to be argument 0. And the second is going to be argument 1. Now, these arguments, I'm not going to go into detail about how scripts work. This isn't a tutorial about scripts, but essentially arguments are the parameters that have been passed into the script. So for instance, when you call a function like show debug message, the first parameter that you put in here is argument 1. The second parameter, argument 2. Sorry, I got that wrong. The first parameter is argument 0. Second parameter is argument 1. Third parameter is argument 2, and so on and so forth. So our function here is going to take 2 arguments, the first argument being the Q that we're going to be using, the second argument being the value that we're looking to put into the Q. And again, very simple function, but what we're doing here is abstracting this logic away from the programmer so that when you're creating NPCs, you don't have to think, was I using queues? Was I using stacks? Was I using lists? Now that we've created the add dialog function, let's go over to play dialog. Now this is the slightly more complicated script. This is where a lot of stuff is going to happen in order to support the playback of dialogue. So a couple of things we need to do. We need to make sure that, number one, a dialogue system doesn't already exist in our room. We can't have multiple dialogue playing back at the same time because you will end up having multiple graphics overlaying each other and it just won't look right. So the first thing we're going to do is a check to see if a dialogue system exists. We will simply say if instance exists, and the object we're looking for is obj dialog system. That's our if statement. If that exists, we'll simply show a debug message that says, sorry, can't have more than 1. The user won't see this. It just means that, for instance, if by some chance you've allowed the user to speak to 2 NPCs at the same time, for instance, in your game, maybe they press the Z button in front of an NPC, that initiates dialogue, but we haven't locked down the movement system, and then they move away and then they go and initiate dialogue somewhere else, or maybe they press the escape key and the menu pops up which initiates dialogue. It won't create another dialogue system because you can't have more than 1 on the screen at one time. So if the dialogue system exists, sorry, can't have more than 1. Else, so if the dialogue system doesn't exist, we're going to create a dialogue system in our room. So we're going to use the with function. I'll just set up our brackets for that. So with, we're going to create an instance this time. Instance create depth is the function. This will create an object at a specific depth. We don't have to worry about depth because the dialogue system in this example is invisible. So I'm just going to place this at 0, 0, and 0. That is x position 0, y position 0, depth 0, and the object that we're going to create is obj dialog system. So what will happen here is everything inside of the with statement that we've just created means that it's running in the context of the object that was created. So if I put something in here like a equals b, that means that inside of the object dialog system object, a will equal b. So anything we do with inside of a with statement, it's happening to that object, not to this script. So now that we have a with statement that creates a dialog system and allows us access to store some variables, what we're going to say is dialog equals argument 0. So the first parameter of this function, when we call it, is going to be the created instance of a dialog. By setting dialog to be equal to argument 0, what we're saying is that inside the context of the obj dialog system, we're going to have a variable called dialog that contains whatever was passed into this script. This allows us to pass information from an object into a script and then out of the script into a different object that we've created from the script. Then I'm going to call the event user 0 function. Event user 0. Now the event user 0 function is essentially a function that will fire when it's called. So if you have a look at what happens here, the first thing is we create a dialogue system on the screen. You can't see it because it's invisible. We add the dialogue that was passed to this script into that object, and then we tell that object, hey, I need you to run a function right now after we have done all of that. That means we don't have to deal with create events. We don't have to deal with the timing of information. We know that when event user 0 fires, dialog is going to contain the queue of messages that we put in it earlier. So now we have these 3 scripts. We can go ahead and use them. I'm going to go to our fake NPC object here. I'm going to add a event that just says the left mouse button was pressed. I'm just going to use the left pressed function, basically meaning that when you click on this NPC, we're going to start showing some dialogue. In this function, what we're going to do is we're going to say my dialog is going to be equal to create dialog. Create dialog is the script that we created earlier. Now that we have an instance of a dialog within our engine, we're going to say add dialog. Now remember, the first and the second parameters of this function were the dialog system that we want to add dialog to, and then the dialog that we want to add, or message that we want to add. So I'm going to say my dialog is the first parameter, and the second parameter is going to be, hey, this is message 1. We can do this a few times, and we're just going to change the message. This is message 2. This is message 3. Messages, we can use the final function, which is that play function. We're going to say play dialog. Now remember that the only parameter that this takes is the dialog system that we're trying to play. So I'm going to say my dialog. So what happens in this script is essentially, let's go over this line by line. The first line is that we create a dialog system. The next 3 lines, we add messages into that dialog system, and then we call the play dialog function. And if we have a look at that, what that does is it creates a dialog system on the screen, attaches the messages to that dialog system object, and then it calls an event within the dialog system so that we can begin to process. Now heading over to our dialog system object, that's obj dialog system, we're first going to have a create event. So let's add a create event to this. Inside our create event, we'll say current message equals blank. Currently the message is empty. We're not going to have any message to display. Then the next thing we'll do is we'll add a draw event. We're going to draw this message on the screen. Now in this example specifically, I'm teaching you the core concepts of how dialogue works. I'm not going to add graphics to this. I'm not going to make it pop up on the screen or open up in a window. Those are specifically tasks around how your game works. But this core dialogue system can be adapted to any situation. For instance, in this draw function, you could make it open up a window and display the text, character by character. You could make it open up the dialogue system above the NPC and then display the message, and then have the message fly up into the air as it goes transparent, as the opacity is blended away to nothing. You could make it do anything you want with regards to how it looks. But as far as the core dialogue system goes, what we're going to do is just use a very simple function, and that's draw text. We're going to draw the text on the screen at position 1010, and we're just going to display the current message value. What that's going to do is at pixel 10 from the top left, pixel 1010 from the top left, X and Y, we're going to have a string on the screen that tells us what our dialogue system is currently doing. So now let's talk about this event user 0. If you go down to add event, go to, I believe it's other, then head down to user events and select user event 0. So back in our play dialog script, we created this object in our map. When we created the object, we gave it a variable called dialog. That variable dialog contains all of the messages that were defined within our fake NPC when we clicked on them. Now what we do is we call the user event 0. All of those things have happened before. User event 0 is the last thing to happen, and when user event 0 is called, what we want to do is we want to pluck a message off of the queue, we want to add it into our current messages variable, and we want to detect, is this the last message in our dialogue? If it is the last message in our dialogue, we can destroy the dialogue system, we can animate it shut, we can fade it out to nothing, and then destroy it. We need to get rid of it so that we can start a new dialogue system in the future. So the first thing we'll do is we'll say value equals dsq, and we're going to use the dq function. Now the queue that we're going to be using is called dialog. Now before I move on, if we jump back to the play dialog script, you'll see here that when we created the dialog system, we created a variable called dialog and we made it equal argument 0. Now if you look at the fake NPC, when we clicked on the dialog, we used the play dialog function, and the first argument we passed was the dialog that we created above. What's happening here is we've called the function, we've passed the function the dialog system, the function, or sorry, the script has gone ahead and created a dialog system on the screen and given that dialog system the dialog object, which was stored at argument 0 and then fired event user 0. So heading back down to our dialog system, what we're doing here is we're saying DQ. We're saying give me the value, give me the first value out of this dialog system. Then we can do a check to see whether or not that value was nothing. So we just say something like if is undefined, and we're going to put value in here. If the value is undefined, then there's no more messages. We got nothing. We can now officially instance destroy. Oh, sorry, I spelled that wrong. We can now instance destroy. Typing. We can now instance destroy this entire dialog system. It's no longer needed. There are no messages left in the queue. We can get rid of the dialog system and allow the player to open a new dialog with another NPC or another sign or something else that's going to display dialog. So now that we've detected if the value that came off of the queue was undefined, if it was, we destroyed the dialog system. If it isn't, we say current message equals value. And what this means is that we pull a value off the queue, we check if that queue was undefined. If it was, we destroy the dialog system. Otherwise, we store the value of the message within the current message variable, and our draw event will update the message on the screen at position 1010 to the new message. Now you could do all sorts of fancy effects in here. You could make it, like I said, type out character by character while playing a sound. You know, these are all graphical components to dialogue, but at its core, at the very beginning of dialogue, this is the base system that you need to create anything that you want from this dialogue system. So let's go ahead and run this, remembering that I have already placed the NPC in the room. I'm going to run the game. Assuming nothing went wrong, we should be able to click on it and see, hey, this is message 1, right? But how do we progress? We have no progression. So the next thing we need to do is go ahead and make it so that we can progress through the dialogue system. This is actually extremely easy, remembering that every time user event 0 is called, the dialog system will automatically check if there's a message and display it on the screen, and if there isn't, it will destroy itself. So let's add something really simple like key pressed, maybe space. Something like that. If the key space was pressed, we can go ahead and simply say event user 0. Now when I run my game, if we click on the NPC, you will get hey message 1. If I press the space bar, you'll get, hey, this is message 2. If I press the spacebar again, hey, this is message 3. And finally, the final spacebar will destroy the dialogue system. Now, let's have a look what happens when we try to create 2 dialogues. Let's click on the NPC once. You'll see the message system displays up the top here. Let's click on the NPC again. What you'll see, if you notice that at the very bottom of my screen, it says, sorry, can't have more than 1 in our output. Now this is because our script is automatically detecting that there is an object dialogue system in this room, and we can't have more than 2 dialogues. I'll give you an example of what that looks like if we allowed the system to have more than 2 dialogues, simply by commenting out some of this code. Let's get rid of this if statement, and let's allow multiple dialogue systems to exist. And you'll see the error that we're avoiding by doing this check. If we click this once and then say we progress and then click again and then progress, let's open up a few of them. You see what's happening here? We're getting this rendering where multiple dialogue systems are trying to display messages on the screen at the same time, and we can't have that. It works in this case because we have the same message, but what if our messages were all different? What if we had, hey, this is message 1, then we had down here something like, you know, some random characters, and then what over here if we had some more random characters? You know, for instance, we run our game like that, what you're going to see is all of these characters just continue to stack up as we move through the dialogue system, and it just becomes unreadable. So we need to keep that check in there just to make sure that we don't have more than 1 dialogue system happening. Now, an example of how you can use this, let's go ahead and duplicate this object. We'll pretend that we have a second fake NPC. I'm going to call this fake NPC 2. In our left event, I'm going to say something else like, oh, hey there. Maybe, how are you today? And that's it. We're going to have 2 messages. It's different from the first one, different messages and a different number of total messages as well. Let's head over to our room, let's drag the second NPC onto the screen, and let's run our game again. Now once this compiles, you should be able to see that we can click on each NPC. Hey, this is message 1. We progress through that, click on the second one, and we get different messages. And as you can see, that is the basis of a dialogue system. So thank you guys for watching. I hope this video has been helpful in showing you how a really simple but powerful dialogue script can make dialogue work in your game. You can adapt this in many different ways, and remember, as I said at the beginning of this video, this entire project is available for download off of the Patreon page. On the post that is related to this video specifically, you'll find a zip file which contains links to where I got the assets from, which I believe was on OpenGameArt. They are Creative Commons, so I believe you can use them in your projects as well. You can share them and modify them and do all that sort of good stuff. You'll also find the project files as well as the source code over on that post on Patreon, so go ahead and take a look at that if you're interested in downloading the project files. Thank you for watching. I hope this has been helpful, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care. Bye for now.